Betrayal doesn't start with screaming. It starts with silence. The kind of silence that settles between two people when one of them has a secret. Natalie had been different for weeks. More distant. More careful. She used to leave her phone on the counter, used to talk freely, used to love spending time with me. But now? Now, she hesitated before answering texts. Now, she smiled at messages I never got to see. Now, she smelled like cologne that wasn't mine. I knew. I knew long before I saw the proof. But knowing wasn't enough. I didn't want to confront her. I didn't want to argue. I wanted her to fall apart. So I started small. A missing set of keys. A call from an unknown number. A stain on her shirt she didn't remember getting. She thought she was just tired. She thought she was just distracted. She had no idea I was setting her up. She had no idea that by the time I was done, she would believe she was guilty of something far worse than cheating. It started on a Friday. She had come home late, her hair slightly out of place, the buttons on her blouse fastened wrong, a look in her eyes that she tried to hide. Work was exhausting, she sighed, dropping her bag on the floor, forcing a smile. I nodded, watching her carefully, memorizing the way her hands fidgeted, the way she kept glancing at her phone. I asked if she wanted dinner, and she said she wasn't hungry. She disappeared into the shower, and that's when I checked. Her bag, her phone, the inside pocket of her coat. Nothing obvious. She was careful. Too careful. But careful doesn't mean perfect. I found a receipt. A hotel bar. 2 drinks. Paid in cash. My chest tightened, but I didn't react. I put everything back exactly as I found it. Because this wasn't the night I would confront her. This was the night I started my revenge. The next morning, she woke up to her phone missing. Liam, she called, walking into the kitchen, a slight edge in her voice. Have you seen my phone? I looked up from my coffee, shaking my head. Nope. She searched the living room, the bedroom, her car, panic creeping in. I waited until she was on the verge of frustration, then walked to the laundry room, pulling it from under a pile of clothes. Found it, I said, handing it to her, watching the way she frowned, confused. You must have dropped it last night. She took it, shaking her head. I don't remember putting it there. Of course, she didn't. That was the point. The next day, I made it worse. I sent an email from her laptop, to herself. The subject line, do you remember? The body of the message was blank. I waited until she opened her laptop that evening, standing behind her as she read it, her posture stiffening. That's weird, she muttered, clicking around. What is? I asked, feigning curiosity. She turned to me, brows furrowed. I got an email from my own account, but I didn't send it. I leaned over, looking at the screen, keeping my face blank. Maybe it's a glitch. She exhaled sharply, closing the laptop. Yeah, maybe. Doubt creeping in. Slowly. Carefully. Perfectly. Over the next few days, things escalated. Her keys went missing. I found them in the fridge. She swore she left her car parked on the right side of the driveway, but it was on the left when she went outside the next morning. Her favorite necklace, the one she never took off, was gone from her nightstand. She was confused, distracted, blaming stress, blaming work, until she woke up one morning with scratches on her arm. Liam, she whispered, sitting up in bed, staring at the red marks on her skin. What is this? I looked over, my face unreadable. You don't remember? Her breath hitched. She touched the scratches lightly, wincing. Did I do this in my sleep? Maybe, I murmured. Or maybe you don't remember what happened last night. Her face drained of color. I turned away, hiding my smirk. She had no idea that soon, she wouldn't trust her own reflection. Natalie was slipping, and she didn't even realize it yet. She blamed exhaustion, blamed stress, blamed herself for the things she couldn't explain, but that was exactly what I wanted. Doubt, uncertainty, that quiet fear creeping into her mind that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't in control anymore. But I wasn't done. Not yet. She needed to believe something far worse. She needed to believe she was capable of things she could never forgive herself for. That morning, I left before she woke up, making sure she was alone in the house. I had work to do. I went to her car first, planting the evidence in the back seat. A crumpled shirt, someone else's shirt. A tiny smear of something dark on the sleeve. A set of car keys that didn't belong to either of us. Then I moved inside. I took one of her shoes and pressed it into the dirt outside, then tracked faint footprints across the living room, leading toward the front door. Not too obvious, just enough to make her pause, just enough to make her wonder. The final touch was the bathroom. A towel, slightly damp. A single red stain, just faint enough that she would have to look twice. And then, I waited. She woke up groggy, rubbing her temples, stretching as she sat up. "What time is it?" she mumbled, reaching for her phone. "You overslept," I said, watching her carefully. "Did you sleep okay?" She sighed, rubbing her eyes. "I guess. I've been feeling off lately." "Maybe you just need to rest," I offered, letting my voice stay calm, steady, careful. "Maybe," she murmured, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. I don't know. I feel like I'm forgetting things." Good. That was exactly what I wanted. I followed her into the kitchen, watched as she poured herself a cup of coffee, still half asleep, moving on autopilot. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. And then, "Liam?" Her voice was hesitant, laced with confusion. I turned, feigning curiosity. "Yeah. Whose shirt is this?" She held it up, brow furrowed, staring at the stain like it might answer her question for her. I walked over, tilting my head. "I don't know. Where'd you find it?" "In my car," she whispered, swallowing hard. "It's not mine. Maybe you gave someone a ride?" I suggested. She shook her head quickly. No, I haven't had anyone in my car. This doesn't make sense." She sat down at the table, running a hand through her hair, breathing uneven. "And these keys, I don't recognize them." "Let me see," I said, taking them from her, turning them over in my hand. A generic set, worn down, unmarked. No way to trace them back to anything. "That's weird," I muttered, handing them back. "Maybe someone dropped them?" "In my locked car?" she asked, eyes flickering with something deeper now. Panic. I could see her mind racing, trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. A story she couldn't remember. She was spiraling, and I was just getting started. "Natalie," I said softly, placing a hand on hers. "Are you okay?" She exhaled sharply, squeezing her eyes shut. "I don't know." Then she got up abruptly, pushing away from the table. "I need to shower." Perfect. I let her go, let her move through the motions, let her step into the bathroom and turn on the water. I waited. 3, 2, 1. "Liam?" Her voice was sharp, her footsteps quick as she came back out, towel forgotten, eyes wide. "What is this?" She held up the stained towel, her hands shaking. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Why is there blood on my towel?" she whispered, her voice breaking. I sighed, rubbing my face like this was hard for me too. "Natalie, are you sure you're okay?" "Liam, this isn't funny," she snapped, voice rising. "I don't know what's happening, but something is wrong. First my car, now this. I don't remember any of this." I let the silence stretch, let her own words hang in the air, let her hear them the way I wanted her to. "Maybe," I said carefully, my voice softer now, "you don't remember because you don't want to." She inhaled sharply, stepping back. "What does that mean?" I hesitated, looking at her like I was scared for her, like I was struggling to say what needed to be said. "Maybe something happened," I murmured. "Something you don't want to admit to yourself." Her lips parted, her eyes filled with something close to terror. And in that moment, I knew. She believed me. Natalie didn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned, shifting under the sheets, breathing uneven, eyes flicking open every time I moved. She thought I didn't notice, but I did. I saw the way she kept glancing at her hands, like she was expecting to see something there, something she didn't remember touching. I saw the way she hesitated before looking at her phone, scrolling back through messages, searching for answers that weren't there. And when she thought I was asleep, she got up, moving quietly through the house, checking the locks, looking out the window, pacing the living room like something was chasing her. Something was. And it wasn't outside. It was inside her own head. By morning, she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hands gripping her coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "I feel weird," she admitted, stirring her coffee slowly, gaze unfocused. "Like I'm forgetting something important." I sat across from her, watching, waiting, letting her speak first, letting her own mind fill in the blanks I had created. "You've been really stressed," I said finally, my tone careful, controlled. "Maybe your mind is just protecting you from something." She flinched, her fingers tightening around the spoon. "Protecting me from what?" I hesitated, just enough to make her doubt herself more. "I don't know," I murmured, "but I think you do." Her face drained of color. "That's insane," she whispered. "I'd remember if something happened." "Would you?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Would you really?" Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. She swallowed hard, looking away, staring at the table like the answers were carved into the wood. "I don't know," she admitted, barely audible. I let her sit with that. Let her own thoughts work against her. Let the fear creep in. Then I stood, stretching, making sure my movements were slow, calculated. "I have to run some errands," I said, grabbing my keys. "You'll be okay?" She nodded, but I saw the hesitation. She didn't trust herself anymore. Perfect. I left, but I didn't go far. I parked down the street, waiting, watching, counting the minutes. It took less than an hour before she cracked. She walked out of the house, looking over her shoulder, her posture stiff, her hands stuffed into her pockets like she was trying to keep herself from shaking. She got into her car and pulled out of the driveway, and I followed at a safe distance, my grip tightening on the wheel as I realized exactly where she was going. The police station. A slow smirk curled my lips. She wasn't going to confess. Not yet. No, she was going to ask questions. She was going to try to piece together a crime she didn't commit, searching for evidence that didn't exist, hoping for a truth that would never come. I watched as she parked, as she sat in the car for a long moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing deeply, trying to calm herself down. Then she stepped out and walked inside. Now, it was time for the next phase. I pulled out my phone and dialed. "Yeah," Ryan answered on the second ring. "She's there," I said, eyes locked on the entrance. "Time to make this real." He chuckled lowly. "You sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back." "I was sure the second she decided to betray me," I muttered. "Make the call." I hung up, my pulse steady, my expression unreadable as I watched the plan unfold. Less than 5 minutes later, a uniformed officer stepped outside, scanning the parking lot, looking for something or someone. Natalie walked out a moment later, her face pale, her movements stiff, and then he approached her. I saw the way her eyes widened, the way she took a small step back, the way her body tensed when he spoke. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew what was being said. "We received an anonymous tip about you. You might need to come inside for some questions." And just like that, she was trapped. Natalie sat in the interrogation room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting between the walls like a caged animal. She hadn't been arrested. Not yet. They told her it was just a routine questioning, that someone had called in a tip, that they just wanted to clear up a few things. But I knew what was really happening. She was terrified. She didn't understand how she got here. She didn't understand why she was suddenly a person of interest in something she had no memory of. And that was the best part. She had no memory. I watched through the observation window, unseen. Arms crossed over my chest, heartbeat steady. The officer leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "Natalie, can you tell me where you were last Tuesday night?" She blinked, inhaling sharply, her fingers curling against the edge of the table. "Last Tuesday?" Her voice was weak, uncertain. I don't know. I was home, I think." "You think?" The officer raised an eyebrow, waiting. She licked her lips, her breath shaky. "Yes. I mean, I should have been." She hesitated. "I don't remember." The words barely left her mouth before I saw the shift in her body, the realization that something was truly wrong. She didn't remember. She had no idea what she had done that night. The officer nodded slowly, scribbling something in his notebook. Do you own a pair of black boots, size 7? Her brow furrowed. Yes, why? He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a clear plastic bag and placed it on the table. A single black boot, covered in dirt, dried mud clinging to the sole, a faint, almost invisible speck of red near the toe. Natalie's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. What is that? It was found near the river, the officer said, watching her carefully. Do you recognize it? She looked at it like it was a weapon, like it might explode in front of her. It looks like mine, but I don't know how it got there. You don't remember losing a boot? No. Her voice cracked. I don't. She exhaled sharply, her hands gripping her hair. This doesn't make sense. Natalie, the officer said, voice lowering, measured, controlled. Do you know a man named Eric Coleman? She froze. Completely. Every muscle in her body locked into place. I saw it. Dark red smear across the back. This was found in the same area as your boot. What? She whispered, staring at it. That's not mine. We know, he said. It belonged to Eric Coleman. She shook her head violently. I don't know who that is. Then why was his phone found near your property? Silence. Her breathing turned shallow. Her hands started shaking. She was falling. Hard. Natalie, the officer pressed, his voice softer now, like he was trying to ease her into something awful. Do you remember anything from that night? No, she gasped, looking up at him, pleading. I don't. I swear. I don't know what's happening to me. Maybe, he said, your mind is blocking it out. The color drained from her face. That's when I knew she had completely lost control. That's when I knew the guilt was sinking in. She didn't kill anyone. She didn't do anything. But she believed she might have. And that was better than any confession. Natalie couldn't stop shaking. She sat there, staring at the phone, the boot, the evidence stacked against her, her breathing uneven, her hands gripping the edge of the table like she was afraid she might fall through the floor. She wanted to scream, to deny it, to make it all disappear. But there was nothing left to say because the truth she believed now, was that she didn't remember. And that was worse than anything. The officers exchanged another glance, their silence making her even more anxious, her fingers twitching, her mind spinning in a direction she couldn't control. Natalie, one of them finally said, softer this time, like he was trying to be the one to help her through whatever horror she was discovering about herself. We just want to know what happened. Maybe it wasn't your fault. Maybe it was an accident. She inhaled sharply, a tear slipping down her cheek as she shook her head. I don't even know who that man is. Then why was his phone with your boot? The officer pressed. Why do we have a witness who claims they saw you near the river that night? Another sharp inhale. She was crumbling. Completely. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling shakily, staring at the table like the answers might appear if she just focused hard enough. I don't know, she whispered. I don't remember. And she meant it. She was terrified, because she didn't know if she was lying. She didn't know if she was telling the truth. She didn't know anything anymore. The officers leaned back, watching her closely, letting the weight of it all settle in her mind. She covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders shaking, and for a moment, I thought she might confess right then and there. I thought she might break completely, but she didn't. Not yet. They let her go that afternoon, but by the time she walked through the door of our house, she looked like a ghost, like she wasn't even real anymore. I pretended to be shocked, setting down my phone, rushing over to her. Natalie? What's wrong? She looked at me, eyes wide, lips parted, breathing shallow. I think I did something terrible. My heart pounded with satisfaction. What do you mean? I asked carefully. She sat down, pressing her fingers against her temples. They questioned me about a man I don't know. They found his phone near my boot, but I don't even remember losing my boot. I don't remember that night at all. I stayed quiet, letting her talk, letting her get tangled in her own mind, in her own panic. I think, she swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I hurt someone. A shudder ran through her, her whole body tensing as she covered her mouth with her hand. Liam, what if I grabbed her hands, squeezing them gently, staring at her with concern I didn't feel. Natalie, you wouldn't do something like that. She let out a broken laugh, shaking her head. But what if I did? She was looking at me now, desperate, lost, searching for something, anything, that could prove she wasn't capable of something horrible. But I wasn't going to give her that reassurance. Maybe you need to talk to someone, I murmured, keeping my voice steady. Maybe you need help. Her breathing hitched. You think I'm losing my mind? I sighed, rubbing my thumb over her knuckles. I think you're under a lot of stress. And I think sometimes, when people go through trauma, they forget things for a reason. She exhaled sharply, nodding. But I saw it in her expression. The complete loss of certainty. She didn't trust her own mind anymore. And once that happened, it was over. Natalie wasn't the same. She moved like a shadow through the house, flinching at the sound of her own name, checking her phone like she expected some kind of warning, some kind of clue that could explain what was happening to her. But there was nothing. No new messages. No missed calls. No proof that she was innocent. She had spent the night tossing and turning, whispering to herself, going over the same words, the same fear, the same impossible truth that she couldn't understand. What if I did it? I watched her closely, careful not to push too fast, too soon. She was unraveling on her own, and I just had to make sure she got exactly where I needed her to go. By morning, she was exhausted, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, staring at the window like she was trying to see something that wasn't there. I had a dream, she murmured finally, voice hoarse. It felt so real. I set my phone down, leaning forward, feigning concern. What kind of dream? She swallowed hard, pressing her fingers against her forehead. I was at the river. It was dark, and I was digging. A small smile curled in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. Digging? I don't know why, she whispered. I couldn't see what was in the hole, but I knew. I knew it was something bad. Her breathing turned shallow, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Liam, what if my mind is trying to tell me something? I reached across, taking her hand gently. Natalie, it was just a dream. She shook her head quickly. But what if it wasn't? What if I'm remembering something? What if I did something to him? She let out a shaky exhale, her entire body trembling. Oh my God, Liam, what if I killed him? I squeezed her hand tighter, forcing my voice to stay calm, soothing. Natalie, listen to me. You need to stop doing this to yourself. I can't, she choked out, her voice breaking. I need to know what happened. I need to, she stopped, her eyes widening slightly, realization dawning across her face. I need to go back there. My pulse quickened. Perfect. I hesitated, just long enough to make her think I was unsure. Are you sure that's a good idea? I don't have a choice, she whispered. I need to see for myself. I exhaled slowly, pretending to be reluctant, pretending like I was trying to protect her. But after a few moments, I nodded. Okay, I said carefully. I'll take you. She looked at me with relief, with trust, with the exact kind of desperation I needed. She thought I was the only thing keeping her sane. She had no idea I was the reason she was falling apart. Natalie sat in the passenger seat, gripping her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. She hadn't spoken since we got in the car, hadn't looked at me, hadn't done anything except stare out the window with that same hollow expression, like she was bracing herself for something she already knew was going to be unbearable. I drove in silence, letting her sit in the storm of her own thoughts, letting the weight of it all press down on her until it was impossible to breathe. She was unraveling faster now, losing pieces of herself with every second that passed. I could feel it, could see the way her body tensed when we finally pulled up near the river, her breath catching in her throat as she looked at the tree line, at the still water, at the dirt path leading towards something she couldn't remember. Or maybe she could. Maybe she just didn't want to. Are you sure about this? I asked, my voice soft, careful, controlled. She swallowed hard, nodding once, not trusting herself to speak. I stepped out first, watching as she followed, slow and hesitant, like her body was moving on instinct alone, like her mind was screaming at her to turn around and leave, but she couldn't, not anymore. She needed to know. She needed to see. I led the way, my footsteps steady, hers uneven, barely making a sound. The deeper we went, the harder she breathed, her fingers twitching at her sides, the occasional sharp inhale telling me everything I needed to know. Something inside her recognized this place. Whether it was real or not didn't matter. Her mind was already playing tricks on her, and I just had to wait. I stopped when we reached the spot, turning back to face her, watching as she stared at the disturbed dirt, at the boot prints leading up to it, at the faintest trace of something that looked like it had been buried and then dug up again. She let out a strangled breath, stumbling forward, dropping to her knees before she even realized what she was doing. "Oh my God," she whispered, hands shaking as she reached toward the dirt, hesitating, pulling back, then reaching again. "Oh my God, no. No. Natalie," I murmured, crouching beside her, placing a hand on her back. She flinched but didn't pull away, too focused on the ground in front of her, too caught in the moment I had orchestrated. "What is this?" she gasped, turning toward me, eyes glassy, face pale. "Liam, what is this?" I exhaled, looking down at the dirt, pretending to hesitate, pretending like this was hard for me, pretending like I hadn't planned this down to the very second. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Maybe you do." She choked out a sob, shaking her head violently. I swear, I don't remember anything. But she clutched at her chest, breath shallow, fingers digging into the fabric of her shirt. "I feel it, Liam. I feel it in my bones. I was here." I let the silence stretch between us, let the wind carry her own words back to her, let the weight of her own mind crush her under something she could never escape. And then, carefully, gently, I said, "Maybe it's time to stop running from the truth." She inhaled sharply, staring at me like I had just ripped something from her soul, like she wanted to argue, wanted to deny it, wanted to fight for some other explanation, but she couldn't. Because there wasn't one. Not anymore. And just like that, I had her. Natalie sat in the dirt, her breath coming in short, broken gasps, her eyes locked on the disturbed ground in front of her like it was pulling her in, dragging her under, suffocating her with a truth she couldn't even fully remember. Her fingers twitched at her sides, hands shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists just to stop herself from reaching forward, from digging, from proving to herself that something was there, something she had done. I crouched beside her, my hand light on her back, just enough pressure to remind her I was there, that I was the only thing keeping her grounded, that she wasn't alone in this even though she felt more isolated than ever. "Natalie," I murmured, my voice careful, controlled, soothing. "You need to breathe." She let out a choked sob, her body trembling as she squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head like she was trying to wake up from a nightmare. I don't understand," she gasped, gripping the fabric of her shirt like she was holding herself together. I don't remember. "But you know," I whispered, just enough doubt laced in my words to make her question herself further. "You feel it, don't you?" She inhaled sharply, turning to me with wide, terrified eyes, searching my face like I had the answers, like I could save her from something she didn't even know how to fight. "Liam, what if I did this?" Her voice cracked on the last word, her body curling inward, shoulders heaving with uneven breaths, panic settling deep into her bones. What if I hurt him? What if I killed him? I hesitated just long enough to make her think I was processing it, just long enough for her to feel the weight of her own words, just long enough to let her believe that she was the one guiding this conversation, the one leading herself to the inevitable conclusion I had spent weeks preparing for. "I don't know," I said softly, exhaling like this was hard for me too. "But if you did, you have to tell them." Her whole body stiffened, her breath hitching, her fingers tightening against the ground like she needed something to anchor her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I can't." "Natalie," I said, letting my voice drop lower, keeping it steady, gentle, unwavering. "If something happened, If it was an accident, you have to come forward. She let out a strangled sound, pressing her hands against her face, her whole body curling in on itself, her mind unraveling completely as everything I had planted bloomed into full, undeniable panic. "Oh my God," she gasped, rocking slightly, her shoulders shaking. "I'm a monster." I grabbed her hands, pulling them away from her face, squeezing them gently, looking into her tear-filled eyes with an intensity that made her stop, made her focus, made her latch onto the only thing in front of her that felt real. Me. "Listen to me," I murmured. "You are not a monster. But if you don't tell them the truth, if you run from this, it will only get worse." Her lips parted, another sob escaping, her head shaking again, her body rejecting it, fighting it. But I could see the cracks forming, the final collapse looming just beneath the surface. She wasn't questioning whether she had done it anymore. She had already accepted that she had. She just didn't know how. "Liam," she whispered, her fingers gripping mine like I was the only thing keeping her from slipping away completely. "I don't want to go to prison." "Then tell them everything," I said firmly, brushing my thumb over the back of her hand. "Tell them it was an accident. Tell them you don't remember. Tell them the truth before they find out on their own." Her breath stuttered, her eyes searching mine, her mind racing for another way out, but there wasn't one. Not anymore. I had backed her into a corner, taken away every exit, every escape, every last chance she had at fighting this. And she had no idea. She nodded slowly, wiping at her face with shaking fingers, exhaling sharply, a sense of resolve settling in. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll tell them." I squeezed her hands once more, smiling just enough to make her feel safe, just enough to make her believe she was making the right decision. She had no idea she was walking straight into the final part of my plan.